occupational administrative medicine, and he is, of course, broadly representative figure in all the healthcare professions, having served at least a couple of terms as vice chancellor for all of the professional schools here on the campus. The article that you had as a reading was jointly authored and gives us the takeoff point for the discussion that will follow the first hour. Dr. Sheps is going to present for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have discussion and then take a break, whether that discussion runs on 30, 40 minutes, something like that. Then we'll move from that to the generalized corporatization readings that I threw in along with the New England Journal article that you authored.
May I ask, would you give them by any chance the Relman piece, the medical industrial complex?
Did I add on that Relman review? I added something to the end of his article, do you remember it? The Relman review of... Yeah, signed off on by Dr. Relman at the very end. Yeah, it was the Relman short review, not the Relman piece.
I see what that is.
That's that short review of stars thing. It was not not the major Relman piece, right?
Well, I'm delighted to meet with this group. I don't know whether this will interfere, Mike, with what you have in mind afterwards, but I'd like to start by talking about the remarkable change which is taking place in this country, which is represented by the increasing role of the investment, money investment in health care. It's a new phenomenon, most of which would have been until 15 years or so ago been pronounced grossly unethical by the American Medical Association. Because nobody was supposed to make a profit out of giving medical care to people. And it was unethical if you made a contract with a company to give care to its employees, because the notion was that that it would be cheaper for the company, in the sense that the company was netting a profit by not paying what they ought to pay. It was on a fee-for-service basis. And that was pronounced unethical during the century. And doctors began to get together in group practice and began to send out bills in the name of the practice. That was unethical. And they were kicked out of the medical society. Because a corporation can't practice medicine. And now we have quite a different situation. The Relman article that I think is most helpful to this in our paper, as it says, supplements it in an area in which he didn't discuss, is a paper called The New Medical Industrial Complex, which appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1981, October 23rd, 1980, October 23rd. I recommend that you read it, because what he sets forth is that in the business of supplying services, now that's the performance of care, there is a rapidly growing investment, private investment. And he makes the point, for example, that as of 3 years ago, 1,000 hospitals, general hospitals, 15% of the beds, there are 6,000 general hospitals, 1,000 is 15% of beds, because these are largely smaller hospitals, are now owned by people who have made a real estate investment, and they want a profit on their investment. In addition to that, there are 300 voluntary non-profit hospitals which are managed on a contractual basis by these profit-making hospital corporations. This is now $17 or $18 billion a year, hospitals alone, out of $80 billion that's being spent in the nation. So it's becoming really quite significant. Same is true in proprietary nursing homes, even more. 77% of the nursing homes in this country are operated by people who made an investment on which they won a return. It's considered perfectly legitimate for people to have a return on their investment, and the bigger the better. And the difference between what you spend and what you collect is the return on the investment. So that it's in the interests of these organizations to collect as much as possible, to charge as much as possible, to spend as little as possible, because the difference represents the profit. And once you're talking about profit on an investment, that's a perfectly legitimate thing. This is also true in home care. There are organized home care services, which there are about 10 large companies that supply home care. Mostly paid for, about half of it is paid for by Medicare. And about 10% of that is now in the hands of big companies. And, if medical care, health services were a commodity like potatoes or oil or shoes, that would be one thing. But it's not a commodity of that kind. It's a human service whose quality is sometimes difficult to measure. It's not like shoes that look nice, and then if they don't wear well, you can come back and complain, and you'll never buy those shoes again. But if you've got from poor medical care, you don't have a chance to go back. Right? So that the whole question of profitability becomes very important in this kind of issue. Now, what the paper that my colleagues and I wrote does is to supplement the Relman paper by setting forth what has happened in terms of the capitalization of hospitals, finding money for the construction of hospitals. And, on Friday, I was at the AHEC meeting, celebrating 10 years of AHEC and planning for the future. I'm sitting next to the AHEC director for one of the areas. I said to him, I've known him for a long time. He said, "You're a rascal." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to hear that. Why do you say that?" He said, "Well," he said, "your paper came out just at the time when my hospital in our city was about to announce a bond issue of $25 million for something we need very badly, and your article was mentioned, it was in the newspapers and so on." He said, "You made it very uncomfortable for us." I said, "Do you think that what we say is valid?" He said, "Oh yeah, but where else are we going to get the money?" That was his comment. The reaction to that paper is very interesting, aside from interesting mostly by its absence. Aside from a few friends who wrote and said, "That's great. I wish I'd have written it myself." One of them said, "I thought of it, but I didn't get down to writing it, if you're right." As far as the editor is concerned, there have been 2 letters only. One of them came from a young economist who's on health administration faculty. And they both said the same thing, and I'll come to that in a moment. And the other came from Salomon Brothers. They were very busy selling bonds. And the one from Salomon Brothers was written by an economist and the physician who's on their payroll. And they both said the same thing. They pointed out that our figure of $3.81 or 87 cents, whatever it is, for every dollar that's used, being what the payback is really not correct. Because we didn't take into account the cost of money over time, and that if you don't use it, that any money you get has a value that accrues to it. And so an increased cost is inevitable. Well, this is an economic argument that we looked into, and we came to the conclusion that there was no end to it, and that what you came out with that kind of argument, with the cost of money and all that over time, depends on the assumptions you make. When will there be inflation? All of these kinds of things. And what will the interest rate be that this would compete with? Will it be higher or will it be lower? And so really what you come out with is what you put in the first place. It depends where you come out. And that, after all, was not our point. Our point was that in terms of money, it's cheaper, even if the government were to borrow the money and have to pay interest on it. It's cheaper because the underwriting cost is so tremendous. The underwriting cost is very high. And if you're borrowing, if you get a grant from the government has to borrow the money, the underwriting cost of the whole operation is much, much smaller. But in the case of our illustration, where we talked about a $25 million construction project and they have to borrow 31, that's an example, you see, of the underwriting cost, which includes the fact that you have to also borrow the payback for the first 2 years, all of that things. But the important thing about that paper, if it has any, so that was the reaction. And as I've talked to people since, it's very much like that physician that I spoke with this past Friday. I mean, it's unwelcome news. And so people, just as people didn't approach the brink and look down and see what it really means, before the paper was written, people having read it say, well, I guess that's right, but it's uncomfortable. What else are we going to do? It's an easy way to get money. So what, therefore, we are moving towards is a situation in which the delivery of care to human beings in this country increasingly becomes a business enterprise. Now, there are all these vaunted efficiencies and so on. But they're not really that clear in most cases. But the main thing about it is that it appears to those of us who think about this, in other than a traditional way, that's an element that creates a situation in which the activity is governed, managed, without ever losing sight of the fact that the more profit, the better. And I repeat, profit comes from the activities, their frequency, their nature, collections on behalf of those activities, and then the expenditures. If you want to get an idea of the kind of money that's involved, there's just a recent report of HMOs, for example, which our present federal administration are promoting as being a very sound investment. Just a couple of months ago, this comes from Dun and Bradstreet, their monthly report. Just a couple of months ago, they're reporting let me read you this paragraph. It was a milestone for an emerging industry. Now, I still cringe when people talk about the hospital industry and the healthcare industry and so on. And people, there are two kinds of people who do that. There's some people who really believe it's an industry and ought to be treated like an industry. And then there's some people who think it's being modern and up to date to describe it as an industry. But anyway, this paragraph says it was a milestone for an emerging industry. Last month, eager investors lined up to buy 1 million shares of Pennsylvania's U.S. Healthcare Systems Incorporated, the first health maintenance organization to go public. Demand was so strong that the issue, originally priced at $15 a share, was finally offered at $20, and still it was oversubscribed. Within a week, the stock was at 33 1/3%. And then later on they say if most HMOs don't reveal their results. But the accounting firm of Touche Ross & Company reported in an investor's guide to HMOs in 1980 that 16 of 39 plans it had studied in detail were profitable. Moreover, the profitable 16 had a median return on equity. Equity means investment. It means the amount of dollars they put in, the building, the equipment, and so on. The 16 plans that were profitable had a median return on equity of more than 30%, with the best performers chalking up to 45%. And I can assure you that's a lot more than Exxon makes out of selling gas. 30%. That means you invest $100 in an HMO, and you get $30 back each next year, and you're going to begin to expect it. Well, just think about what that means if you're operating an HMO. Just think about that. That kind of pervasive force which runs it, and which says, we are here to make money on our investment. Now that's our task. Now we're going to do it by doing a lot of good. We're going to sell a commodity that the people want, but they don't have much alternative but to take. And we're going to package it, and we're going to sell it in such a way. We're going to sell the kinds of things that are going to give us the biggest profit. One of these smart-ass consultants working for McKinsey and Company, Booz Allen Hamilton, was talking about at a meeting at Duke University on the corporate approach to hospital administration a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. And he was telling them how they help hospitals analyze their operations. And he started off by saying, you have to recognize that a hospital is a series of businesses. Some of them small, some of them big. All the way from the gift shop to the operating room. And each one of them is a separate business. What you have to do is to examine these businesses to see how much profit they're making. And if you've got some of these businesses that aren't making a profit, you ought to see about increasing the profit or getting rid of them. In the week that our paper was published in the New England Journal, the Wake Memorial Hospital one of the administrators told us that the bondholders had pointed out to them that their adolescent service was not making money, and they better consider doing something about it, either leaving it up so to make money or dropping it. It's perfectly, absolutely to be expected, particularly since adolescent services, it's not like treating cancer. It's not terribly popular, terribly important when you take health into account. But there it was. This was the pressure that was rising. So that now, just pari passu, let me mention that a few days after that particular paper was published, I was doing some work at the medical school in North Dakota, and then I spent the weekend in Winnipeg, which is, as some of you may know, immediately north of North Dakota. It's a city of 500,000 where I was born and brought up. And I spent the weekend there, and one afternoon, some people came by, and this included a couple of classmates of mine who were, both of them senior surgeons, very able people, and they had read the paper, and they were incredulous. That's the only word I can use. They were incredulous that something like this could be allowed to happen in a country that they thought they understood. Here, two countries, in so many ways, same, in so many important ways, quite different. These men were incredulous this kind of thing could be allowed to happen. And it just tells you, how mesmerized we are in this country, more than in the other, I know of, with the notion that anything that makes money is worth doing, and is bound to be better than if something is operating without it. Now, the development of HMOs is really the most amazing of all, in a sense. Of course, you could say, okay, hospital is very complicated. There are a lot of hotel-keeping functions. There are a lot of technical functions that have to be organized well and have to mesh properly and work out adequately. So it takes a lot of managerial skill, a lot of operations engineering, and all sorts of things to get that kind of well seamless. And so, you need business skill in order to do that. And, you can't say that about medical care. You can't say that about doctors treating patients in an office. And yet we now have a situation where this is considered perfectly okay for an activity which consists entirely of the delivery of health care services. Now, any of these housekeeping, hotel-keeping functions to be conducted in such a way that people will get a return, any return, let alone a 30% return, on the fact that they've invested a certain amount of money, say in the building and in front-end money to make it possible. So we have a situation which I think would produce amazement in most other countries of the world, and which I believe is bound to create very serious problems. Something else, yes. One of the things that's said about the proprietary hospitals is that they're more efficient. And there was a study done recently that was just published, which of these institutions, comparing them with comparable institutions that were operated as public institutions, and it showed that these hospitals don't take care of patients more efficiently. Their vaunted efficiency, economies of scale, and better management practices were not in evidence. Overall, their costs were a little higher, and they were notably higher for general services. 13% than the nonprofits with which they were compared. Now this difference represents the cost of the corporate office, marketing, sales, image making, acquisitions, and that kind of thing. And of course you know that these institutions don't select their patients very carefully. They select the patients who are going to pay. They don't undertake to do a community service, except to the degree to which a filling station does a community service. If you've got the money, you can buy gas. And if you got the money or the insurance, you can go to the private hospital. If you don't, they're not interested in you. And why should they be? They're there to make money on their investment. So we've got, I think, in this country, a very serious situation, which historians in the next century will analyze and try to figure out how the hell anybody ever let this happen. I think that we will all, I probably won't be around to do that, but other people will rule today that these things were considered too sensible. I told you the report from the Wake Hospital. We got other reports since then of exactly the same kind of pressure on parts of the operation of the hospital that was not functioning. Now, see, one very important difference between this and the past method of financing the construction and renovation of hospitals was that if with county funds or philanthropic funds, so the hospital was increased in size, and 10 years later it turned out that there were some excess beds for whatever reason, a preventive for hernias, so there'd be no more hernias operations, or some way of dissolving gallstones, or something that would cause a significant reason for hospital admission to disappear. That institution could close some beds, put them to another use that maybe didn't cost them. But they're going to be very embarrassed under those conditions if they've got to pay back $150 per patient day, which some of them do, out of the first dollars that they get, because a reduction in occupancy means that they're not going to be able to pay back the bonds. Whereas if you're not paying back bonds, you're then in a position to say, okay, things have changed, and we can reduce our capacity by 10%. We don't have to break our backs to try to keep the place filled with people. Well, that's the kind of dilemma. There was a young resident who had something to do with who left here about 7 or 8 years ago to go to a group practice. It wasn't even an HMO, and it was run by the doctors. The group practice had 9 people, and 2 weeks later he was back, and I said, Joe, what are you doing here? He said, I couldn't practice in those guys. I said, well, what happened? Well, he said, I was there 3 or 4 days, and the business manager came to see me. He said, look, I want to put you at ease. I know what you feel like. You just finished a good residency, and you're worried about the fact that it takes you 45 minutes to see a patient. Don't worry about that. Take as much time as you want with the patient. Just be sure you order enough X-ray. That's all it's better. Well, I mean, that kind of thing, you see, perfectly understandable, but pretty bad. So here on the one hand, you see, we've got the government and the public generally putting a lot of pressure on it. We've got to have cost containment. And there are physicians. And there are lots of physicians. They may not be the majority, but there are lots of influential physicians who feel that it is important to contain costs. They want to do everything they can to do that. And the hospital administrative board says, hey, wait a minute. You want us to set up an ambulatory surgery unit which will have the effect of reducing our occupancy by 3%? We can't afford to do that because we won't be able to pay back our bonds. 3% is a lot of money. That's the kind of weird situation. A man from Mars would say, what is this? And I don't see it changing for quite a while. I see it getting worse for us all. Because, as I say, even the people who have a sneaking notion in the back of their minds it's really not sound, it's the easiest way. Now, the fascinating thing about this, to me, in a repulsive kind of way, is the fact that this is putting an independent, prestigeful, powerful, authoritative profession more and more in the hands of people who are invested to make a profit. I mean, that's the thing that's fascinating, as I say, in a repulsive way. That's the kind of thing that you wouldn't expect. But there it is. And for those physicians who don't like that kind of thing, for those young physicians who don't like that kind of stuff, they're not. I mean, the alternatives are being closed down. This is where the opportunities are. Yeah.
My question is that what are they going to do? It seems like the whole system is going to become incorporatized.
Well, before I try to answer what are they going to do, I'm filled with war stories. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was talking to a colleague who was a hospital director, a physician, hospital director in another big city. And he said to me, my son finished a residency in obstetrics and gynecology. He joined a 4-person group in obstetrics and gynecology. And he said, this was, as I say, 5 or 6 years ago, he said, he's getting a minimum pay of $60,000 a year, which is like $85 or $90, which is pretty good. And he said, and they told him he might as well buy a Cadillac because he can ride it off. And he said, I'm pleased that my son is going to be comfortable, but I'm really worried about what kind of doctor he's going to be. Because he's starting out with a whole framework and such a highly organized business operation that he's going to stop being the kind of doctor I think he ought to be and just be a technical guy just before the promotions that suit the people who are running the place. It's very serious, and it's a very far cry from what you see in most other countries. What's the solution? For the individual physician, very difficult, young physician, because increasingly this is where the opportunities are. Now, it's not predominant yet in the practice of medicine per se, talking about practice as being just seeing patients. But it's beginning to happen. And so those who see the difference, and many of them do, will try to go in other directions. But if you want to live in California, where there's the surplus of physicians anyway, if you want to live in California, this is what you're going to do. Because you're going to be hard put to it, find a place where you can develop practice just by hanging out a shingle, let alone trying to get on the hospital staff. So I think the outlook is very bad. I think that if there's any hope, it rests in having physicians understand what this really leads to in terms of the severest kind of curtailment of their professional autonomy, where it counts, from the point of view of performing an appropriate service, and having the public understand. I mean, these kinds of things are, the public is now deeply involved. And unless the public understands the price that the public is going to pay over the course of time, these things are not going to change. 25 years ago, when I was working in Boston, I was director of a rather prestigious hospital. One of the members of the board of trustees, a rather rich man, was riding with me somewhere, and he said, tell me, somebody suggested to me I should invest in nursing homes. There's a lot of money in nursing homes. Can you tell me about that? And I said, yeah, there is a lot of money in nursing homes. There's going to be a lot more. The nursing homes are going to grow. And I said, you can make a hell of a lot of money in nursing homes. But I said, I'm not sure that you want to do it. Let me tell you what it means. And I told him what it means. And he said, oh, hell, I'm going to do that. But he did, 4 years later. Because all his pals were doing it. It became the thing to do. And I don't think there's any hope of reversing this trend without a public appreciation of what's really going on. And there will be plenty of physicians who would agree.
The study you cited said that maybe the healthcare system or properly conventional is basically bad. Do you have any evidence of positive things that come from how it's resolved?
Well, I don't have any direct evidence. I'm sure that there's some of these institutions that are purchased better. They do some things better. But you see, if the whole context is one of finding the profit-making centers in the institution and examining those on which you, quote, lose money, end quote, separating them all off, and therefore, and doing something about those either to make money or to drop them, then, that's part of the price of, you see, if you're in the business of making money, of making a profit on an investment, then you're selling something. Your decision as to what to sell is dependent on what you can sell for a profit. You're going to have as few loss leaders as possible. I mean, a supermarket will sell something for 87 cents instead of 92 as a way of attracting people to go on looking. But they don't have many loss leaders. They can't afford it because they have to make a profit. One of the officers of the hospital that I was in Boston was the president of a big supermarket chain, Stop and Shop. Some of you have been in Illinois, they know that chain. It's the seventh largest chain in the country. It was then. And I used to meet with him in the evenings, and I was fascinated because he would go to the phone. They were expanding at that time. He would go to the phone, he'd call a new store, and he'd speak to the manager, and he'd say, well, Joe, how much did you collect today? What was your business today? Tell him. He'd look at the sheet and say, well, that's not as much as we expected. And you didn't get as much yesterday as we expected. Here are two things I want you to do. Add a couple of loss leaders and cut down on the housekeeping. Well, it's exactly what's going to be happening in the hospital. It's happening now. It's no different than an industry, cotton industry, that is required with greater or less vigor to install anti-pollution devices. Installing a device means that the cost of production is higher. They don't want to do that. They have to be forced to do it. Well, that's an easier thing to measure than the intimate aspects of medical care given to people. A minute after that. So that on the one hand, you see, on the proprietary hospitals, the evidence so far is that they are not more efficient. That in fact it costs more per day, cost of operation. But they make money because they select their patients. And they select, not only do they select the patients, but they promote the performance of procedures that are money-making, for which there's a high rate that's being charged. If there's anything that has no logic at all, but no logic at all, and I speak from experience, it is the pricing system at hospitals. It's got nothing to do with what things cost, any more than the fee structure of MDs has anything to do with what it costs. When I was in practice, and I was 1,000 years ago for a few years, the standard fee for an office visit was $3. If you did a blood test, it was another $1. If you did a urinalysis, it was another $1. But the standard fee for an office visit to inject a patient with salvarsan for the treatment of syphilis was $10. Why? Because it was a loathsome disease. Nothing to do with the procedure, nothing to do with the skill, nothing to do with the effort. It had to do with what the traffic would bear. Well, it's exactly the same in hospitals. I mean, all of this vaunted efficiency, this cost center, that, it's all nonsense. Because they tend always to keep the room and board charge for general service low and to load it on to the tests. And the charges for the tests have nothing to do with what those tests in fact cost. As a matter of fact, it's very hard to calculate precisely. But they don't even try. I had the experience in another hospital where I was the administrator in New York City about 16 or 17 years ago, when the new machinery for testing blood came in, the SMA-12, the SMA-16, and the chief pathologist came to see me and he said, you know, there's this marvelous new machine with 1 drop of blood, you can do 16 chemical determinations. And it costs, he told me how much money, and he said, he said, we'll make money on it. I said, what do you mean we'll make money on it? Well, he said, the tests that it does are worth $120. I said, what do you mean they're worth $120? You just told me that it costs $12 to do it. Well, he said, but they're worth $120. I said, well, how do you get there? You know, I knew what he was going to say, but I was sort of playing dumb and naive. Well, he said, that's what each test now costs. When you add it up, that's what the charges are. Oh, I said, he's talking about charges. Well, what's that going to do with costs? I said, please tell me how you can rationalize charging $120 for what in fact costs $12. So let's make it 15, let's make it 18, let's make it 20. How do you get to 120? Well, he said, that's what's worth. Same reasoning that made an injection of Salvarsan worth $10 as compared to an office visit worth $3. That's the kind of game this is. The only thing that makes any sense in hospitals is to say a hospital of a certain size and capacity has to have a standby capacity that patients need, because when they need it, it makes an enormous difference. And everybody ought to be paying for that. And you don't make all these differentiations. I mean, people are getting bills now, 50 cents for an aspirin, whether they've had it or not. I mean, everything is itemized, you see. Well, how do you rationalize 50? I think it's more. But the point is that the answer you'll get is, well, but that's the only way we can make ends meet. Well, I just want to tell you, this hospital, when the Duke Hospital was opened in 1930, they didn't charge on an individual basis. They charged a certain amount of money per day for a patient. For every patient, regardless of what they got. On the theory, this is an overall service. You get anything you need. And those who need less help to pay for those who have more, like an insurance, automobile insurance. And then, at the end of 10 days, the rate went down, because it was clear that after the first 2 days, the amount of work done usually decreased. When the North Carolina Memorial Hospital was opened in 1952, I was the director of program planning for the Division of Health Affairs here at that time, and I prevailed upon them to do the same thing. But I left, and I'm not suggesting it wouldn't have happened if I'd stayed, but I went up north, and within a few years later, they both gave it up. There were all sorts of reasons for that I don't know about, but they gave it up. On the other hand, they're being paid that way by Medicare. They're paid on a reimbursement basis, without any reference to what was done for each individual patient. Anyway, I've talked more than I was allowed to, I suppose.
First, you all can see we've been moved thoughtfully into the balance of the things we'll be discussing, because I think it's fortunate that Dr. Shep's moved from municipal bond financing and implications like the Staples on and opens the door to it. And I'm interested, in addition to any questions you all have, is, in all my individual conferences with you, there's a tremendous amount of career relationships that you all have. I mean, compared with medical students, so we deal with seminars. A very solid fear, whether it's family nurse practitioners threatened by ongoing developments in medical care, or the hospital administrators. And there's real unemployment out there. Skilled administrators are unemployed. How does all this, where do you fit into it? How do you like what you're fitting into? Where do you want to fit into it? What debates do you want to make about these issues? This is as gloomy a prediction as an expert who sees a lot, like Dr. Sheps is saying, this is a trend that is irreversible. The givens today, where do you come out?
Compare this with Canada, for example, where there's a national health insurance program. Everybody's entitled to hospital care, regardless of who it is. It's paid for by the government, a combination of province and federal. And the hospitals there get prospective budget. People sit down with them and they say, well, we're going to talk to you about next year. The hospitals want more, they never get as much as they want. They complain that there are certain things they can't do, and so on. Nobody tells them to have more patients than they need. Nobody tells them to do more procedures that are needed. Their complaint is they may not be able to do enough. Well, I can understand that, although, there's so much slack in the system, there's so much excess being done, that's not really the problem. What it forces them to do is to think about what are the things that need to be done for patients that are going to do the most good, as opposed to what are the things to do for the patients that might possibly, one case in 1,000 or maybe 10,000, make a difference. From the public point of view, there's a tremendous difference between those two alternatives. So that the hospital people, and I get Canada fairly often, they complain that they can't move as easily as they'd like to in terms of new things and all that kind of thing. At the same time, they recognize that they are being forced to make priority decisions about where their resources will be put. And they make those decisions, obviously, in terms of the kind of load that they've got, the kind of problems that there are. I can tell you that the situation that existed in reimbursing hospitals after Medicare and Medicaid starting in 1966 was terrible. It's so good that it was terrible. Because in New York, for example, where I was at the time, the hospital I was in, this is true of all the large hospitals, 95% of the money we got came from one of three public or quasi-public agencies. Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross Blue Shield. 5% came from patients out of there, 5% commercial insurance. And it's still the same in big cities, it's about 91, 92%. And each of those three agencies pay on the basis of reimbursing costs. Now, when these programs started, you see, there were no limits put on. Hospitals were in a position of being able to do whatever they pleased. I mean, and we were in New York, we were developing this new thing and that new thing, even though some of it really wasn't justified, maybe, because this very specialized activity could be done, was being done already in a number of institutions, and their capacity was not being fully used, and so on. And I said to my board, I said, this is crazy. It's not going to go on. I mean, the time's going to come when the government is going to say, now wait a minute. We're going to pay your cost, but we're going to have something to say about what you're doing. Because we don't want to have to pay for unnecessary duplication or for unnecessary utilization and so on. And that's what's happened. Now, I'm not suggesting that the problem has been handled in the best way. I'm simply using that by way of contrast, you see, to a situation in which what the administration needs to do is to make sure not only that it makes ends meet, but that in terms of the cost of operation, but added to its cost of operation is this front-end burden of a tremendous payback. And make no mistake about it, it's a tremendous payback. In general, it's $1 per patient per day for every $1 million that's borrowed. So that, for example, in the institution that I used to work at in New York, they built an associated institution across the street for orthopedics. It cost $64 million. They had $4 million. They borrowed $60 million. And the front end cost, added to the cost of, to the per diem cost, was $60 a day before they opened the door for a patient. Yeah.
What's the scenario? Discontinued hospitals go broke and bond market falls out?
Well, some of them will go broke. The financial people are being very careful. In the first place, small hospitals don't get this. So the small hospitals will go out of business. But byline. In the second place, the bondholders have, if a hospital is on the verge of defaulting, if they don't pay for 1 year, they could put somebody in to run it. Just like that. Put what amounts to a receiver who can run it. If the estimates and the predictions are grossly wrong, or let us say 15% of the population leaves because huge industries close, and they don't agree, then maybe a few of them will go broke. There has been one that was a smaller industry.
What are the prospects of future changes to the federal initiatives? I mean, I personally think we got to be federal initiatives.
Well, in the last year of the Carter administration, there was an instruction to the Office of Management and Budget to take a look at this question, and an instruction to do away with the tax exemption, which would make these bonds much less attractive. You see, the bonds are very attractive because they're 8% or something like that, 8 or 9, and they're tax exempt. So for the average investor, it's really a 15, 16, 17%. Whereas commercial bonds, otherwise, they're not tax exempt, they're 14%, 15%. Makes it very attractive. But you can be sure, I mean, the Reagan administration has asked the question to be looked at. But I don't think, my guess is they will not act on it. Because, hospital bonds are the greatest thing, it's the most important new development in the bond market in the last 15 years. As a new source of business. It didn't exist before.
And it just seems to me that we're going to switch the whole system today, structurally, we've got to do some change because all the Social Security changes are going to approach. But there's at least going to have to be a half-hourly banding approach to hospital problems because people are not going to pay higher taxes.
Well, it hasn't reached this point at all. Very few people appreciate the nature of this problem. Namely, what it really does to the operation of an institution. And many economists will give you this business of discounting money and figuring out the cost of money and say, look, if the government is going to have a loan program or even a gift program, they have to borrow the money. And therefore that costs interest. And you get all of this kind of thing. Well, even if the costs were the same, the Hill-Burton program, which gave grants for the construction of the hospital, at least was in a position to require developments that fitted into a state plan. And in the 25-year history of the Hill-Burton program, there were lots of plans that were scaled down because they had to fit into a regional concept. But none of that exists now.
Yeah, but you're not going to see it overnight. It seems to me like in tax equity on those bills, they include changing the reimbursement, including states, so that these stocks, the reimbursement slowly squeezing out some of the profit, or the ability for profit to make, and narrowing your profit margin somewhat. And then you got the DRG coming down, which hopefully, in any circumstances, cutting down expenditure, but not enough to say the trust fund will go to 1987, 89, you're going to get some kind of public outcry and things will go into like you did in Social Security. Slowly, I'm hoping that we'll work towards some type of cost accountable system, which is not attractive for investors, but obviously you're pretty bad. You don't see anything in the moderate future at all.
Well, I'm not very hopeful that the reasonable things will be done because his government operates by increments. And the policy decisions are made as a result of the differential influence of all sorts of lobbies in the, quote, industry, end quote. Where is the public lobby here? It's not anywhere near strong. And what we get is an end result, which is sort of an optimization of the pressures of different lobbies. None of that makes for a fundamental look at the problem. And it will drag along, and things will have to get an awful lot worse before there's a fundamental opening, in my view. I mean, you know, the thing is that this country's decision-making in social policy is very badly organized because we have this notion of many let 1,000 flowers bloom. You know, what's that? I'm trying to think of the word. You know, multiple things going on. Pluralism. You know, we think pluralism is a great thing. So you don't have to make any policy decisions. You don't decide which is better. Not everything go on. And nobody pays attention to the price of pluralism. The price of pluralism is that you have all sorts of things going on that are bad. They're not bad enough to die, but they're bad just the same. You see, social policy in most other democratic countries is made on a much different basis. There's pressures, to be sure. There's also party policy, which addresses these solutions in different ways.
But maybe I'm just a pure optimist, probably so.
Well, I'm a great believer in government. I just think that the American government operates in a way which may have made sense when the Founding Fathers were writing the Constitution, but it doesn't make any sense now.
Okay, but I think there are things that we could do, HMO type things, inpatient hospitals, PPOs, further provider, which I think will be written in legislation before long to help cut down on the disability and make money in the area, or make money in such a way that services cannot be sacrificed and still offer investment without allowing them to clamp down on services.
It's not going to happen until people understand what the issues are.
Well, I know that the other part of it is that awareness has to be made that when the Medicare Trust Fund does go down and predictably a crisis comes, people are going to be saying, oh, because the population is aging, that's not true. 2.5% increase in cost over the next 15 years because of the aging factor. It's just, the structural inflation factor. And we can use the opportunity for this outcry, like I say, this security outcry, but it's a system that's what's going on here. We use that outcry to talk about the whole structure of the system. Use that as a spearhead. To me, it's the only, this crisis reaction is the only thing we have going for us. I think it's going to come up in the next 5 years for Medicare. And maybe we can use that.
Well, I guess all I'm saying is, sure, that's fine, but I don't think one should wait until then. I think we need a broader understanding of what the problems really are.
Well, I was just saying, you said when reverse the trend, you got to increase the public's awareness of what the problems are, but I'm wondering what kind of strategy you have for doing that, or is it going to have to be a crisis-type thing first, and then pay attention to it?
Well, I don't think there's any simple formula. I'm saying that we ought to share with the public what we think we know and understand. I'm saying that when Medicare is cut back, and hospitals find because of that they can't make a go of it, and therefore increase their rates for everybody else, that the public ought to be helped to understand that they're going to pay for that difference, as long as those services are going to be available. There are two results. One is that initially, for many people, they'll be dissuaded or there'll be obstructions in their getting the care. The other is for those that do, the American public is going to pay anyway. But they're going to pay in a left-handed way, by increased charges on their own care. See, if I were, and I never would be, but if I were the president of the American Hospital Association, I'd never be elected, but if I were, also I'd never run, because that's a representative organization that represents all sorts of things, from one end of the spectrum to the other. But if I were the president of the American Hospital Association under these conditions, I would say clearly, the American public needs to know that to the extent to which this reduction in payments for Medicare patients does not prevent people getting the care, to the extent to which the care is given, the American people are going to pay for it, and they're paying for it in another way. Therefore, let them decide whether they want to pay for it through taxes or pay for it when they're sick, or pay for it through their premiums to Blue Cross, sick or not. And that's what I would do. I'd make the issue very clear. Now, they come up to it, but they don't quite say it. I mean, when the reductions came through last year, all the hospitals in North Carolina, you'd see in the newspapers that because of this change, they're going to have to increase their rates a certain amount. But they don't take the next step and say, in effect, this means that the public in North Carolina is going to pay for the difference. That's one way you can do it. I mean, you just have to spread the word. People have to understand what the real issues are. But instead of that, you see the tendency amongst professions is to keep it to yourself and say, well, we've got to find a way to solve it. And at least, if it involves changing public policy, unless you're on the side of the people with strong lobbies, and a strong lobby means having a lot of money to spend and representing a lot of power, or representing a lot of votes. Now, the Social Security changes that have been made had very much in mind the vocal and vigorous voting behavior of elderly people. But for many of these things, we don't have that. Certainly the poor are not well organized. So that in this decision-making that takes place on Capitol Hill, as between various lobbies, the public is very poorly represented most of the time.
On the other side, what about the reason, that reason for counting on the fact that this is coalition, the fact that now that we realize...
Oh, yes, I have some hope for that. That's a lot of power. If they stick to it, they can do a lot. That does offer something. That's right.
I'm trying to get some glimmer of hope here for...
Well, but you see, that's another version of the public. Very important version of the public.
Oh, I think that with PPO mechanism makes a lot of real good, I think we get a good section of hospital.
Well, let's see how well it goes. It may go pretty well. I don't know. It remains to be seen. It's interesting, in California, they've got another version of that. They have a Medi-Cal czar. Medi-Cal is the name for Medicare in California. They have a Medi-Cal czar now who is making contracts with hospitals for hospitalization. And Medicare patients will only be able to go to the hospitals that have written a contract with the state. And he's negotiating very toughly with the state. There's a lot of money involved for a hospital. It could be 25% of their income. And some hospitals are getting contracts and some are not. And, for example, the Medical Center of the University of California, San Francisco, has not got a contract as of 10 days ago. But there's another big hospital in California whose radiologists reduced their fees by 20% so that they can have a competitive contract. So those things do work when there's enough power. I mean, that czar is working with a couple of $1 billion.
But there was some populace there was some voter stimulus that passed to get them that waiver.
Yeah, because of the increased costs all the time. Otherwise, taxes would go up. Sure, there was a basis for it. But there's no quick fix for this kind of thing. I mean, there's no superficial kind of fix, changing the incentive here and there. Basic problem that I'm talking about is that we veered off it just a little bit, but the basic problem that I'm talking about is that the increased involvement of investment, private investment in the delivery of medical care is poison. It's poison to the system, in my view. Because it represents a mindset, a point of view that is, I think, very damaging to any healthcare system. You go to any large industry, but let's take large ones, and you say to them, what's your task? You think the supermarket companies that would say, well, we're in the business of feeding people? Who's going to believe that? They're in the business of selling people what they need in order to eat in a way that they can make money out of it. That's their business. They want to make as much money as possible and stay on the right side of the law. most of the time. Fudge a little bit if we can get away with it. What's the force that does that? Profit is what you need. So that I don't know how you can get away with it. I don't know how you can build in. So you see, if you're talking about toys, manufactured toys, you can have a federal agency which monitors the toys and issues regulations to make sure that the toys will not be poisonous, damaging, or carry a risk. But if you're talking about the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-by-minute delivery of medical care, what kind of regulations are going to affect that?
I totally agree with you, but my point is, what do you making a statement that, there's a problem without being solution-oriented to it. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you're going to be totally able to take business out of healthcare. I like it personally, but I don't think you're going to be able to. I think you have to move into some sort of structure which directs your incentive towards good care. I'm not going to blow out my hat and say, I do it, but I don't think with the type of historical type of thing goes on in this country with the profit motives and the ethics and such, I don't think you're going to be able to take profit out of everything, and certainly not out of foundation like medical care, which is so ingrained today with big money. And so I think you guys have to redirect those incentives a little more.
Would you all agree that the initial issue is pretty hard for the public to understand? Like 3/4 to 80% of nursing homes, already, the whole drug industry, the supply industry, etc. That is the public even going to react to that, even though that is a revolutionary change? Private doctors not any longer in charge of the 5 of them in partnership of the decisions, but a corporate entity is, and they work for it at a very high salary. Is the public even going to grasp that if they gain, say, 9 to 9 hours in a shopping center? If you look at what the marketing is going to be about all this, even faster moving, as Dr. Sheps may know, is moving up fast on that Pennsylvania-based outfit that went on the New York Stock Exchange. It's just health plans. It's just taken over the Arizona. A few public HMOs. It's taken over 16 to 18. Or secondarily, what about the nonprofit blues? Do they function that differently? Don't they favor municipal financing of their hospitals? Don't they have to compete and put it out in $100,000 salaries and in perks, and this is the whole thing. Where do you see the public reaction? Do you see any? Where do you see your own reaction to this whole thing?
Somebody else is talking.
Well, I have a hard time understanding, so I'm sure, and I'm being exposed to it, I'm sure the public has a hard time understanding this. I just don't see how they're going to react. I don't see that unless we have some sort of horrific effort at informing them. Because they are, as you pointed out, for the most part, poorly organized. I mean, nobody has a network of information. They don't have access to the information except what they get in newspapers or maybe from their local health professional rights. So once a local health professional, I don't know how it all fits in. If they're going to be the ones that can affect change, then they've got to have some sort of power base and some of the information and some of the resources to push that fight. So once they get the information, it's like, what are they going to do with it? And then that numbers.
I think health is going to become a major item for candidate letter. And public groups, you lobby specifically at healthcare companies. Somebody should, the health research group is in place, but can students in. We need a cost control public interest lobby. And we start.
is a lot of people, even the, the general people out in the suburbs, they know that got people out of Lee County, are they happy with their AMI hospital? That, because the rates increased by $100 3 months after they get down. But Fairfax, Virginia was the other thing that they just went through the hospital for at least where they good off of their hospital. Fairfax General was running their own hospital, rates were low, and everybody liked it. Went over to the management group, and Fairfax Hospital Authority now is jacking up rates here and there. Trying to close down a hospital to get a seal in here. People realize that something's going on with businesses. There's a dark shadow of business on healthcare, I think. I think they can maybe realize that. So, correct it up.
I'm not, in disagreement with you about working something out. All I'm trying to say is that any incentives, any manipulation, which doesn't take into account the fundamental problem, is not going to work. I just think that is what has to be recognized. And I'm interested in what you say about Sanford, about Lee County. I found myself on an airplane one day several years ago next to a young man who was representing that company in the negotiation. And I asked him if the rates were going to go up, and he said, no. I said, they're going to look at it before. He said, of course we're going to look at it. But you see, the thing that interests me is this reaction of incredulousness on the part of my Canadian classmates. And what I think is interesting about the United States is, why did the people in Sanford do this? Why didn't they expect what has happened? Don't they understand what private profit means? That it's the difference in what you spend and what you collect. Therefore, you try to keep the latter, the former down, and the upper as high as you can. I mean, it's obvious. Natural. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And there's no competition. There's no competition in Sanford.
How much of the Canadian budget it goes to hospital care? I mean, how much do people are
It's roughly the
taxed?
same this year.
The same.
Roughly the same. About 40%. But the point is that they have control.
Percentage GNP is lower.
Yes, somewhere about 7.
Yeah,
7.5. That's because they could control you.
Their hospital system is much more regionalized.
Yeah. Well, and in Quebec, for example, which has the best organization, they regionalized. They closed 5,000 beds in the course of 4 or 5 years in the province of Quebec. They just said, you can keep them open, we're just not going to pay you because they're not needed. You ought to be reducing a certain amount. They told the McGill Medical School how many residents they can have. And you can be sure this didn't go down well with the chairman of the clinical departments. I mean, the fairest rose in their tiara is the number and quality of residents they've got. That's not directly related to the need for residents. And so, as I say, there's prospective budgeting when they argue about what is it you really need next year.
I think my question is similar to the other two. If you take away the source of funds for capital spending, it's fine if you dry out that source, but what do you do about the pressures that are still being raised on the part of physicians who want new equipment and the public
It means it.
who wants
Yeah.
better services and that sort of thing? It seems to me it takes more than just information to the public. It takes getting the public to pay.
Yes. Well.
And I don't understand.
Well,
anything.
Well, let me tell you about the Hill Burton program, which was a law passed in 1946. During World War II, there were studies done, and there was a general appreciation of the fact that, particularly in rural areas, in the less urbanized metropolitan areas, there was a shortage of hospital beds. So, in order to make to deal with this deficiency, a federal program was adopted which made federal money available as gifts, grants, for the construction of beds, with emphasis in rural areas. That was later changed. And they nationally provided 1/3 of the money that was needed. But they did it on a sliding scale basis. In other words, the poorer states were entitled to a higher proportion than the richer states. So a state like North Carolina got about 50%. The legislature of North Carolina, one of a small number that did this, decided this was so important that they would put money in. So they put about another 20%. And so you had, in a period of 5 or 6 years after 1946, a great decrease in the construction of hospitals in North Carolina and in other parts of the country. Now, if it turned out that some of these hospitals weren't full, that was okay. They didn't have to stay full. They didn't have to pay back. And there was no pressure for increased utilization. Let's remember that the pressure for increased utilization, when the government is paying 45% of the cost of hospitalization now for the whole country, the pressure for the increased utilization is also being paid out of taxes because they're paying more. They're having to reimburse at a higher level. So that we're paying it back anyway, you see. And therefore we're paying for unnecessary work. But that program worked extremely well. And it operated for 25 years. It was then expanded so that they could use money for health centers, and then it was expanded to help build hospitals in urban ghettos and that kind of thing, and develop ambulatory care centers. Now the people who criticize that program will say that the biggest mistake they made, now everywhere, all the hospital people in North Carolina will tell you that's the greatest thing that ever happened. Everybody's very happy. People who criticize the program will say that they overbuilt in the rural areas. And that's true. But the overbuilding took place because nobody in the 40s and the 50s took into account the tremendous growth of technology, which would make it impossible for small hospitals to do enough. I mean, just the base wasn't big enough. And so it's true that there was overbuilding, but they simply didn't see it in the future, and nobody saw it in the future. But there's one thing about that program that was very important, and that was you just couldn't build whatever you wanted to. It had to fit into a state plan. And in general terms, there was a regional plan with a teaching hospital in the middle and then larger institutions, and then, there was a standard kind of regional representation that was used. It went from the local hospital to the large general hospital to the teaching hospital.
You understand the AHA projects itself already. There'll be 1,000 hospitals closed by 1990, just without all, last month's or the months before's corporate projections or anything. The thing, though, that all the discussion indicates is this may have much more to do with marketing skills and with all of the things that corporatization is bringing, even on the part of the nonprofit competitors. In other words, how well does a hospital's image stand with there's 5 of them in Toledo or somewhere like that, and who gets knocked out?
Who's going to realize CHA is a state huge thing?
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think you have to decide whether you want to go flail totally against the system, or you want to put your egg in all in one basket, or whether you want to attack it and say, okay, we'll leave the profit sector to a certain part of the market and provide for a pool-type situation for low-income, where people go to 2 tiers and have some chance of getting those people served, or trying to fight the whole thing.
The AHA is interesting because I don't know why anybody should feel that anything public spirited can come out of it. And I say this because the membership of the AHA membership is made up of public government hospitals on the one hand, the non-profit volunteer hospitals in the middle, and the proprietary hospitals on the other hand. Well, now the interests are very different. And any policy they agree on has to optimize these interests that are opposite ends of the spectrum. It's preposterous. I mean, I mean, I wouldn't wish a job like that on my worst enemy. For them to talk about, and that's why they're talking about the hospital industry. And they can't take a strong stand on any aspect.
That's why they're fragmenting too into proprietary organizations. You know, its own lobbyists have much huger, roles right now at the moment.
I know the president very well, and I know him well enough so that I sent him a copy of this paper, and I said, Dear Alex, I don't know if you've seen this, but I want to make sure that you do. I don't think you're going to like it, but tell me what you think. And he wrote me back a long letter which didn't attack the basic point at all. He simply said, I don't think that he said, you indicate that the bond issues had an availability of bonds increased the growth of hospital construction. I don't think that's so. I didn't even bother to look it up, because it doesn't matter whether it did or not. And it may be that, that's really not the point. We weren't suggesting that there was unnecessary hospitalization. Hospital beds. We were saying, once they've got it, they've got to keep it full. And some other small comment. But he didn't debate the basic point. He simply implied there's no other alternative. And when the Carter administration brought up this point about tax exemption, they raised hell about it. They said, and the Association of American Medical College, the whole, quote, industry, end quote, takes the view that this is the way to go because the money's there. It's easy to get. And they don't have to worry about the payback. It's part of the per diem cost. There's something else about this, and I'll let you go because there are things you want to do. Since 1975, hospitals have been getting the depreciation in the formula of Medicare, Medicaid, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. You know what depreciation represents. It's the write-off of the value of the property that you own. The idea being that it wears out, and therefore it's worthless, and you should have a replacement. Well, you know that most hospitals, don't fund that depreciation. They just use it as income. They don't put it aside. They simply don't put it. That's what it's supposed to be for, but they don't put it aside. And they don't worry about it because they figure, well, when we need some more construction, we'll have bonds. And at a minimum, the government could insist that depreciation be funded. So at least that kind of money is enough. Our hospital is going out for a bond issue. Here, the North Carolina Memorial Hospital is going for a bond issue. October.
Are you familiar at all with the legislation that was attempted to pass last November about some kind of rate restriction on the bonds? Does that have anything to do with
Yes, it did.
ID?
It did, but it didn't get anywhere. Yeah.
That was for local, you had to have local review elections.
Yeah.
That, right now, it's only, if you get, I think if you get 20% of the local electorate, they still have a vote on it.
I know.
Is there anyone that hasn't questioned or spoken, Mrs. Chair?
You mentioned the study that when you found out the comparison of the efficiency of property and hospitals versus hospitals. Do you have a source to share that?
I don't have the exact bibliographic reference, but let's see. It was published in hospitals, and
That is color tone too. Thank
Yeah.
you.
It says about
Blue tone. Yeah.
it was published in hospitals, and it was done by Lewin, Lewin, Lewin and Associates, published in hospitals. 1981. Maybe it was 80 or 82, but it appears to be 81. It's worth looking at.
Any other questions, comments? We'll take a 5-minute break and reassemble for the rest of it. There might be as many as 3 people left who have not quite set projects with me, and everybody else is actually down to deadlining, I think. Maybe out of the others, there might be 2 people who haven't got deadlines in my red book yet of when they're turning in. Some of those are coming in just before the Easter break, several immediately after it, keep it away. Everybody understands the idea is to keep it as far away as you possibly can from the enemy, of course. The shared rural reading is out. Last thing is the April 18th trip. I've located 2 cars. We need a 3rd car volunteer.
As long as people are willing to help with gas.
Huh?
As long as people are willing to help with gas, I have a large car.
You have a large car.
City village, 6 people.
Okay. There'll be 2 other cars. There is, I think we'll pick up an attachment or 2, for that tour. Catherine Drozdowski, who isn't here today but has begun, coming in to audit, I think if any of you are in class with her, you might indicate that requires a couple other classes. Are you in some of your first year classes where you can indicate that? And if any of you know of a medical student or someone, let me know so we don't overcount. What we have a capacity for is 18, with 2 6 cars and your 6, so it'd be 18 if we needed it, okay? But with our normal enrollment, we're sitting too tight on 12 with that 13th person. We don't want to run it that way, so I think 3 cars would be the best way to do it. They're expecting us up there. I went by for a visit, and they're going to give us a good show and a good tour. I think it's going to be a very worthwhile experience. And remember, it's not limited to it all being, it's not, an example of, say, the rural thing being done over here on the ground with administration and with the medical director and with a concept of joint leadership, which many places doesn't exist. That is a partnership of leadership between the administrator and the medical director, which you can question, you can see for yourselves how, if it is theoretical in any way or if it isn't a day-to-day working relationship. And I went in and simply, made certain that the hosting would go on so we could get out of there whenever you felt like we were breaking, say around 3, so we'd be back in plenty of time, okay? Lunch will be brought in there, and the doctors will break for that. Okay. You had readings, which included a few things I just threw in. I think because we all know that the initial dollars for Hospital Corporation of America, now the most successful of all the large hospital chains of proprietary character, the biggest chain actually in the United States, proprietary or otherwise, came out of Kentucky Fried Chicken dollars. Therefore, because of this latest break in dental stuff, it's Mr. Donuts dollars through a lot of the Wall Street, the Underhill relief, some of, having a lot of pieces of paper, I wanted to share with you quickly the thing, and then I used some Business Week things to bear out some of the trends so you could relate the whole thing. There's nothing new to saying that the drug medical supply area haven't for years been, private and so forth, or that they're not private in other nations. It's rather that what we're viewing, and that's what's important, is like what happened in energy. You had separate coal companies, you had separate oil companies, you had separate, and today you have huge conglomerates that have moved in addition to all those and bought up nuclear. And when you do that, which is part of what can happen, in other words, you get what they call vertical integration, then you get horizontal integration. Now what can you do? Where can you break out on any of the pricing, okay, unless there's a war of it. Then the last reprint was again from Dunn's on a successful chain, and giving you a feel for the, a business review of Hospital Corporation of America, a Nashville-based outfit, and how it went. But why don't we continue, because I think Cecil Shep's discussion moved us rather rapidly from what he had, the article was on, right into the body of proprietary invasion of the healthcare field. We started that discussion, and I guess in asking you how you feel about it, I wonder if many of you haven't already had the cope where you're thinking administratively of it, and what are you going to do about it? If you can't escape into being just O's and government jobs that are going to police it all, if you're going to take entry-level jobs in it, and this is where more and more numerical entry-level jobs are, then what does it mean? You know, and what does it mean when the kind of decisions on whether to use a nurse practitioner, a PA, or being able to pick up, let's take the latest National Health Service Corps decisions to remove the $9,000 bonus. You know, that dropped salaries from $37,000 base to $29,000. All these are signs of what's blowing in the wind. I mean, the physician shortage is over. You know, the surplus is on the market, and doctors. I've talked to 2 clinics this week that couldn't touch anybody in rural areas for anything less than in the 40s, and they both signed up people in the low 30s. You know, without a batting an eye on salary. These are all. You know, what does that mean to what I happened to dissent from in our last week's discussion, trying to put Ms. Proctor on the spot between whether she was an idealist or a selfish part of the world in which she was simply posing that if she had resentments, they thinking 22,000 was better than making 17,000. A doctor making 40, I don't see where you lose your idealism. That was, you know, outlook. I didn't see the necessity for opposing the two against each other. You know, are you equally greedy? You know, and this kind of thing. The discrepancies. You know, you don't talk to the underdog, so to speak, as if as nurses' aides try to earn a minimum wage. You don't see, and are you as selfish as doctors too? I mean, that's a lot of hogwash. You know, to say to an FNP, really. You know, does that mean you're as selfish as doctors? I equally disagreed, but there was enough arguments going on preventive medicine. I thought it's a distraction, and I'll take off onto them. But I'm ventilating, I guess, at some of the other sort of cross kindling that was, you know, going on. But Glenn is famous for doing that. It's hard to get onto a good HMO discussion without him looking around if there's a nurse in the room and starting a war over preventive medicine or in the School of Public Health. Told him afterwards he hadn't been in the school in 10 years, and I really didn't, since he doesn't control any jobs, and implied that he did, you know, like you all were, he controlled so many jobs that if you all had this horrible anti-doctor outlook, he wasn't going to recommend any of you for jobs. You know, I asked him when he last put anybody in any job anywhere, you know, that because it was an implication like you were screened out of jobs, you know, in his world. And but tell me, because one of you afterwards did tell me that you felt there might be some truth to what he was saying. Is that a distraction onto this thing? We're talking about corporatization, talking about some of these kind of issues today. But aren't doctors likely, as Dr. Shep said, to lose some portion of their autonomy as they've known it, as they become employees? Or is there no danger of it? You see what I mean? How much anti-doctor sentiment, I don't even see it, what was referred to last week, in the sense of, you know, as most of you know, if you've got a doctor that you're working with, you know, you're going to work with him. You're going to find a way to deal with his ego, to deal with anything else, you know, and work with him administratively, okay? I've never found any of you, you know, to be off on some tangent, but some of you, one person came to me afterwards to say, I think he's sort of right that in a number of the faculty here there's just a tone of that, you know, a lot is awful wrong in the medical profession. Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the things I would say is that there may be a term like that, school public health. No, I informed the people of class when I was on school nursing, so the school public health wouldn't take care of the brunt of anything that I said. But, you know, you should be able to criticize. I mean, any profession should be able to see that criticism it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all wrong, or that they're all bad, or that all individuals in that profession have something wrong, inherently wrong with them, especially when they're doctor. But looking at the profession as a whole, what are the trends? And the fact is that the American Medical Association has a lot of power and control in the healthcare industry. And thinking in terms of them losing autonomy in this private proprietary agency like Hospital Corporation of America and Medicine, I think that's really important to be brought out. But I wonder how much. And then I say, why haven't doctors resisted something like Hospital Corporation of America? And then you look at the article that we had talks about there's 3 million. Or they just have a lot of stuff in there.
You're talking about the HCA reprint I gave you?
Right.
Okay.
So most of them are doctors, so they have the ability to control.
That's right.
So how realistic is that they're going to lose their autonomy, or do they not see this as a means of gaining more control over?
I think that part was not discussed today equally, that say HCA was organized and formed by physician proprietor owners. True, a lot of, Kentucky Fried Chicken money. There's a dentist in that other, donuts thing that's sitting in the middle of it. And the other thing they're going to do is cut the dentists they bring in for a percentage. The corruption is inherent in their style of how they operate. In other words, we guarantee you whatever, 50,000 plus 45% of the, take on the place. You see what I mean? And
Didn't say that 60,000.
yeah, the detail isn't the point. I think wouldn't you agree that they intended in a way that co-ops the doctors as much as possible into it? And these are influential doctors. A great many doctors are just so academic and neutral anyway that these are the outgoing ones. They want to, dominate the tone of what a medical society does, I think.
It was interesting, too, something else was on my day about whether or not, about public outcry and should the public be able to see
Yeah.
that this is going to cost them money and stuff, and this article. And the reason I'm so hot on Hospital Corporation of America is because I've done work with it.
Yeah.
So it was a while in the hospital, and just a tremendous amount of money. They're talking about one of their major goals is to cultivate a very positive public image.
Yeah.
And that's something I think they have succeeded in extremely well. And people don't see that as any kind of threat, does it seem?
No, I don't.
In working at the hospital, I mean, there are people who just won't go anywhere else because the kind of hospital it is and things that they emphasize. And it's just amazing to me. So I don't see how anybody's going to see it as a threat, because out of the 3 hospitals in Raleigh, they seem to have this favorable image of anyone. People just think they're great, and they'd like to see more of it.
Well, right here in Chapel Hill, I would hate to have had a plebiscite over, a real public vote over whether to have allowed in that competitive proprietary hospital. Because before that vote, I tell you, they would have opened up a campaign about the waiting lines at the university and the way you're a number, and do you want in the middle class? Remember who the appeal is to. We're talking about a middle class revolt. There's no question the working class, every health is way down on its list. A laid off steel worker. His first desperate need is to get, bread. And, if he's run out of unemployment compensation, he's lost health insurance, but that doesn't hit him till he gets sick. If he gives up on preventive care, he stops going to the doctor's office. You see what I mean? The things that are so irritating in raising that issue publicly is that those who are used to organization, those who should revolt, don't have it as a high priority in Youngstown, Ohio, in Detroit, and all. The main thing is to get back to work. To get employed when you're unemployed, and to get bread, and to get food stamps, and way down the line, if you've got Medicaid, sales standing money. Your humilities are so numerous. That health care is not high.
In looking at all this, what I see is the U.S. system becoming more like the the systems in Europe. You know, he was comparing us with the health system in Canada. We're becoming more like the health systems in Europe, but instead of being governmentally controlled, such as the systems in European countries, we're letting the private, for-profit corporations come in and do what others have, or what the government is doing in other countries. And I think we're going to end up hitting some of the same problems that they have, or creating some of the same
Why
problems.
don't you elaborate what you mean, because I'm not as clear. There's a certain pluralism in some of those systems, and they vary, one from the other.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
they do. Let's say, okay, let's look at the English system in general. Theirs is a pure national health system.
That's right, it's a national health
Anybody
service
can get-
without insurance.
But then they have their little private sector where if you have the money, you can,
Yeah,
you can
that's
go to
right,
the private
absolutely,
doctor.
yeah.
But even with that system, they have problems providing care for rural areas, rural underserved areas. And they're ending up with the foreign doctors going in. I don't think, even with bringing in corporations to run the hospitals here, we're going to provide care where it's really needed. You see what I'm saying? The corporations, because of the profit-making money, are going to end up becoming in charge
They want
of
the paying
hospitals.
patients. They want the
they're
middle class
gonna be
patients.
the money.
Yeah.
And we're going to be in the same mess that they're in. It doesn't seem like we're going to learn from their experience. And it doesn't seem like we're really seeing that we're going through a parallel development. You see what I'm saying? Because we're profit-making, we're different from what England did 15 or 20 years ago. And that's not the case. I think we're going to go the same way. We're going to end up with the same problem.
Isn't it going to be a worse problem in a social sense? In other words, do you doubt that HCA and Humana, and their competitors and the new owners of these health HMOs, do you doubt they're not going to offer awful good services to employed people with insurances and please them? And the tone and the cleanliness and the service and the personnel management, everything about it is going to please, the earning, public, where the people who use the most care, need the most care, the Medicare, Medicaid population, and I don't think their PR, I think Ms. Proctor's right, I don't think their PR is going to, do anything flaunting, like, when they first came into most towns, people said they're going to shut down the ERs because they don't make a lot of money on them, they'll do this. They tend to have a real PR department that slows up any flaunting that, brings them doom down on them. And in most towns, they carefully pick them. I'll bet you in Raleigh there's another hospital that gets much more of the poor people. You see what I mean? They pick their towns so carefully, you see what I mean? And Cary may, if it's a fast bedroom suburb, maybe the next one that Humana or HCA will go to,
You know where RCH is located in Raleigh, in North Raleigh, which is the most affluent.
Affluent, okay. And in fact, where Carol Miller was from, she then described 3 hospitals, and there's no question that the proprietary, HCA, went in there and bought out a little doctor traditional hospital, turned it in, rebuilt it, and made it the example hospital, you see, and leaves the dumping on the other proprietary, the older local family-owned one, and the non-profit, In other words, they're doing a superb job at making everybody sort of upgrade, get, cleaner, get better personnel attitudes and all of that. But they are creaming off the dollars. Their insured population is the best in there.
Well, what I don't understand is, does this necessarily make the quality of care worse in other places, or does it just go from where it is and upgrade the hospitals they buy out? Like, we never discussed quality of care, and does it get worse necessarily? I mean, I'm not saying that I necessarily think that all of the fine stuff, just that for-profit versus not-for-profit, I don't think people can always say that not-for-profit is going to give better quality of care at all. And isn't that a major issue? I mean,
Yeah,
That's
and you know the debate, how do you measure quality? Is access part of quality, right? Is accessibility part of quality? You know, that is a huge thing. Some doctors want to scientifically measure, you know, quality by what the chart shows and the propriety of, you know, what's in it prior to surgery, what's in it prior, you know, after 48 hours, etc. Is accessibility nothing to do with it? You know, if they have interfered with accessibility on the parts of any form.
I think the scary thing is when he was talking about the assumption that I mean, if this is the way our healthcare system is going, that making a profit is what's good. So the healthcare system in general is going to move that way. Then where is that going to leave the folks who can't afford to pay for care? And there's a basic issue here of whether healthcare is the right or a privilege. And I guess I see, I mean, there are two groups who are kind of warring on this, and being one who feels that it's more of a right than a privilege than this kind of thing scares me. So maybe the quality of care can be the same, or not necessarily any worse in the population, but maybe just what you were saying about learning to coexist with proprietary agencies that are doing some sort of control so that it doesn't that's what scares me. Just the way
What do you think? Let's say in many of these places, they encourage the doctors, when they buy a hospital, to buy shares in the proprietary corporation. You have to understand the style of how. I can't speak to the Raleigh thing. I wasn't there, whether they entered the field of a new building or bought out a pre-existing one. Huh?
New building.
Okay, they looked at a market and they started from scratch, okay? They may have done what HCA has done in a lot of places. Went in and had good meetings with the doctors, and then after several good meetings with the doctors, really had prospectus on their stock, you follow me, the opportunity to buy into it. You now have people that have, you can say, well, doctors already in many cases owned in their portfolios drug company stock, right? In order, you know, that. It's a more direct thing. In other words, there's so much Valium sold that owning the company that makes Valium, that it's a little like I'm going to fly Delta because I own 10 shares of Delta. You know, you're not going to influence the value of your Delta by 1 penny. There isn't a chance. That's how much Valium is sold, okay? It's quite another thing to know that, you know, that it only owns so many beds, you know, 20,000 in the country or 30,000, and that, you know, you've bought 1,000 shares of it, you know. You can influence it in any one place if other people are acting like you're acting.
You know that as an employee, even down the maintenance,
You can buy.
and hospital
Every
you
employee,
can
right.
buy stock.
I knew it.
So if you're a full-time employee, that is one of the options that's available.
Yeah.
You know, these places give raises to folks every year. I mean, constantly, every year that I've been there, you know, regardless of what's going on in other places, and they pay better than several other places
Right.
in town. So there are a lot of attractive things about it.
But you've raised more than a philosophical issue. You've raised a real issue of whether, as this happens, remember, they're never going to enter a market that doesn't pay off. They're not going near Youngstown. They're not going near Akron. They're not going near Detroit. You know, they know not where not to go, right? They are carefully not picking parts of the Sun Belt. You know, there's no reason to go near, you know, after all, Raleigh-Durham's a sophisticated area full of, you know, fine state employees with benefits and IBM and, you know, the whole research triangle thing. They're in the areas that pay off, you know. And Nashville's not just country music, you know. It's quite the Davidson County, Nashville area is a million, you know, it's a huge metro area. These are, but it's not a ghetto area, you follow me? I mean, their brains have already told them, and their marketing and their field people, that Meharry Medical College is there. It's one of the 2 black colleges in the country, and it has to have a teaching institution, and that they're not going to have a flood of black patients. You see, I mean, because of this, every bit of their actions are thought through. Okay. Now, what then happens to rural people? start with all the kinds of people, right? They're not going to go out and fool with small rural hospitals. There just isn't, there's not enough CAT scanners, there's not enough dollar flow, to work it. They're going to be where the growth is, Greensboro, High Point. If they're not in that triad, they better get into it. I mean, they read the lists on most desirable places. They're going through them. What does that mean for a country? Without any other planning, counterbalancing planning, to take care of other people. And what does it mean on the point that Mr. Combs made? What about quality? You would say quality's pretty good down there without knowing what goes on in tissue committees and other reviews.
Based on my personal
Yeah.
experience in working in two hospitals,
That's right.
quality of care, that hospital is superior to that place.
Right.
And that's personal experience, that's no statistics.
I know. I'm just saying, but it is a piece of testimony, okay? And the question has been raised about it. Yet, see, it's more than theoretical to say that unless Medicare makes regulations, other people make regulations, it is in the interest of that hospital to have a high occupancy rate, right? To have a lot of OR activity. This is where the action is, and where the most tests, and when the scanners come into play, and everything is at a very high rate, And I'll tell you what troubles me, having said all that about proprietaries. The people I know in their nonprofit competitors are having, if you want to put it that way, to act in very much the same ways to survive and to compete. In Dayton, in Toledo, there are each town, because they're multi-hospital competing towns, there is one hospital that he has nonprofits that have hired the most superb marketing teams. You know what I mean? That one hospital, nonprofit, has just like shot out so that, HCA looks like dunces. You know what I mean? They're out there with their own HMO. They've got like an 8-point program. You know what I mean? They've realized we're going to die here, with HCA moving in if we don't move out. Is it then good for competition? Does it lead to getting on the ball and getting on the stick?
That's the argument I had with Mr. Shep, that he's worried about corporatization. I would approach it from more the general angle. I don't care if it's public property or whatever. The whole system is going to falter. And that's going to, like I said, you either have to go to two-tier or some alternative. That's a blatant two-tier with a pool for your education. But the fact is, right now, in the growth period of these proprietaries, what happens when the growth period runs out? What happens when it gets to saturation? What happens when the stock starts going down? Well, you're going to see cost cutting, but then you're going to see it affecting quality of care. And you're going to see them asking for the government to bail them out. And all it's going to come down to the tax prices. Years ago, when they said Ted Kennedy was planning on cost 15% GNP for national health insurance. Which you also want to take some to change, you might as well go to the public is going to end up bailing things out. And
You raised some of the possibilities. Let's just talk about, we haven't got, we're having to jump around a little bit. You can't keep it in compartments for like 2 sessions from now. HMOs, which we've been on, okay? PPOs, preferred provider organizations. I tried to give you a quick handout of 2 things that simply appeared. One on the 17th. I'm just trying to show you 2 items out of last week's Wall Street Journal that I handed out today fast, because they're very quick things to take a look at, okay? First, that very little piece on page 1 on equity investors buying up HMOs is simply bearing out, that what was just mentioned, the U.S. healthcare systems. But the data, that kind of short article, is not the quality of what the Wall Street Journal normally does, because look at that 3rd paragraph. Not all HMOs are candidates for Wall Street money, only a minority. That's quoting academic studies out of Interstudy. You follow me as to how many are proprietary? What's really happening that hasn't been announced yet is that the proprietaries are buying up the nonprofits. that they are saying are outside the scope of what they can go after. So that health plans, which hasn't even announced yet, but is clearly moving towards the stock exchange, is buying up any floundering, or capital needs outfit, an outfit that doesn't have enough money to open up, a satellite or something. One, and quickly getting federal approval. And I don't know that they wouldn't have got this under the Carter administration. I'm not saying it's a Reagan administration thing. The Office of HMOs, who has funded them, wants to show Congress a good record. If they think a place is near bankruptcy, I've been in touch with several where they immediately say that proprietary may pick up the balance of this year's federal funding if they'll just quickly create. You give them 30 days to create a nonprofit infuse the money over so that it's pure cash flow, you see, into a new proprietary, which may make it then work. But they are immediately, some of the nonprofit people I know that have gone staff with those people say they are superb outfits at marketing. I mean, they'll take the direction of that HMO in the town, and if its age group is around 48, they'll make the goal to move it down to 36, you see, and really go after the employers with, young employees who at least use the thing and enroll there. So that one of the things you were arguing quite correctly, is will they move out in the direction of HMOs? You know what happened in energy, don't you? After the Arab oil crisis, the U.S. coal, 400 years of reserves, was our American answer, right? Who walked right in and bought the whole damn thing up? I mean, who do you think owns all the big coal companies today? The oil companies, every last one. I mean, the first largest was Consolidation Coal, was picked up by Conoco, which is now owned by DuPont. The second biggest coal company in the United States was Island Creek. It was immediately picked up by Occidental Petroleum. And the third biggest every one of them was picked up, one after another, down to tiny ones by Exxon or somebody. So that there's almost no independent coal production. And yet it was the U.S. answer, if you remember for a while. Now how do you price it? Don't you see what I mean? $3 a ton coal. And with increased productivity, it remained at about that. It should be at about $8 a ton. It's been priced up to $30 to $40 a ton to equal the price of equivalencies in barrels of oil. What you got, and I'm simply trying to show you in dollar terms, this little is just an announcement. You understand? When this kind of thing runs, it says it appears as a matter of record only. You understand? That kind of ad means you could not buy a penny of the bonds. That 160, that's a line of credit being announced by Citibank, than which there is no bigger, in Wall Street and, in New York. And they simply, who the hell ever heard of Health Group? I got a notion it's an outfit that we haven't heard of also that's a split off buying up HMOs. The third thing for you to remember is they're buying up group practices. Fast as they can lay their hands on them, that they think they're cash cows. That is a new development we never had before. And the only thing there that Ms. Proctor gave some indication of earlier is moving over the way the Kentucky thing looks, the way HCA article looks. They do generally say, what are you EMT men making? If they say 200,000, fine, let's start with that. In other words, what's the debate? I mean, why shouldn't they take it from them, right? They're picking them up right where they are and saying, now we'll work out percentage arrangements. We own it, we give the direction, but if you can turn this gross into a bigger gross than you are, and they put accountants in there, you can have a percentage of the action.
52 is noticed appropriate for Wall Street.
Yes.
Do for-profit, I see they're for-profit HMOs. And do they have open enrollment? Do they have percentage for Medicaid and those different?
Yes.
Well, my question is, or my concern is that in this class and another class, I've seen HMOs presented as the salvation of a community as a way of saving money and cutting the cost of the health industry. And now it's brought out that they're capable of making money at the same time that they're saving dollars for the health industry and providing care for all others.
No, that's an excellent point.
And why is this bad?
Let me first respond to what this little paragraph means. This is a quickie. This is not, a signed off article. That they have columns in which they have like 18 little items in the column. These are done rather rapidly, okay? The first part indicated there's money being raised for it. So the third paragraph, obviously somebody got on the phone and called Interest Studies, which is a very respected, Minneapolis-based study group on HMOs. And they simply reeled them off, the figures indicating that they can only go so far in buying these up because only 52 out of 280 then, at their last count, are even for profit, okay? You see what the reasoning is here? Meaning that most of them, 228, are not even available to them. They're non-profit. I'm trying to first say that is inaccurate, very fast stuff. That my knowledge of what's going on in the field is they are buying up non-profits, okay? A further development is, I reported to you a few sessions ago, that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, seeing all these corporations working and being threatened as a non-profit, health insurer with some concerns, has purchased 14 Michigan HMOs for itself, okay, besides starting up some of its own. What I'm saying is the general chain-like effect is that first, the fact that they're non-profit doesn't necessarily mean what this article implies, that they could not then be a candidate. For them to buy up, they can be. And I'm even indicating the feds cooperate by feeding in federal grant money, which in my opinion is close to corruption. In other words, it's clearly the only candidates must be 501c4 or C3 organizations by IRS standards. They simply are saying just create quickly for the balance of this year a non-profit so we can bleed it out, sign a management contract with them for your proprietary to manage them this year, and at the end of the year you will have drawn down the money and then take them over. Have their board just vote to go under your proprietary. You understand? It's like a device for giving a non-profit subsidiary to a profit, okay? The second part of your question, if I can take it apart, is you're asking, is it undesirable even if they were money-making, if they can make money and take a decent enrollment of Medicaid and people of that order? Is that what part of your question?
Not just decent, but providing care for all those people
Yeah.
with an open enrollment. If they are making a profit at that, I'm concerned about the idea that profit is some terrible evil that we shouldn't deal with. Even in England and Canada, the profit there exists. To say that it doesn't, I think is misleading. It's just that in their hospital industry, they have better control over the actors. And we can sit here and talk about controlling profit and the evils of profit, but until whoever's making the policy decisions makes an effort to control the actors, then I don't see the point in that. Well, I don't see the point in saying how evil it is unless you have some way to make the system work better.
Counterbalance it in some. Well, what's the use of name calling? I mean, calling them evil if you don't have other solutions.
What she said, well, I agree with that, but
Yeah.
Mr. Shep, said all this stuff. He didn't have anything.
No, and he was stating it pretty hopelessly. Expects the evil to grow, so to speak. It is evil, and it's going to grow.
Be solution oriented, but I think the point she's bringing out, so that's what saying we did explain earlier, is that, you're not going to do away with the profit, like you say, you can go private or even still becoming a specialist and not get paid less. The independent family practitioner, they're very economically incentive now, since we're doing 74 or whatever. But it's still economically incentive. You just got to redirect it.
to the HMOs, and HMO can provide good service to,
Yeah.
including the poor people, or including the people that are ordinarily not able to pay completely. Somehow, if the profit motive is being made attractive to care for these people, then that's fine. If the profit motive, you have to redirect your efforts to make sure that says don't harm the total provision of health care. You can't do it that way. Keep your profit motive in perspective and inform these schools and what the federal government pick up.
What? Let me ask this. See, I see enough brain power at this table who cares enough in making federal policy, so if you all, were participants with others. What usually happens in this country is something gets worse, whether it's railroads, in the 1880s, or a big business, monopolies or something, and then we don't act in an ideological way, you follow me to say? And that's what is taking place here. It's like an ideological debate. Profits are evil. Socialism might be good, you follow me, or anything like that, or bad. And when you do that, like Senator Helms is doing, say, on the right, then you also get isolated, okay? I mean, that everything is bad, okay? What you got here that might happen, I simply want to ask you, what I fear for a little bit, is I'm not concerned about the ugliness, is that when enough people fall through the traps and there is a reaction, we're not seeing any reaction now, okay? Let some dramatic examples with the media that we now have covering events, so that even last night a show is put on and causes enormous phone calls, even though periodically, every 10 or 15 minutes it said this is only a documentary, and then you can tell the phone calls are getting worse at ABC or wherever it was, NBC, because they added more, the lines became more graphic at the bottom, and oftener, on that scary idea that a nuclear attack was going on in Charleston, South Carolina. And I was around some places where, I began getting the phone calls in the neighborhood. Hey, turn on your TV fast, there's something broken loose, and they're staying on the air with it, and people took it to be a news broadcast. That is a reaction, you follow me, that people react to. We all know the 60s and the 70s had some of this. Where is this going to come from? And might it not be wise if the falling through the cracks, if it does happen wholesale enough, you follow me, and angry enough, so that some policy people like you all can come. See, I don't think you're going to be listened to. You understand what I mean? The frustration you're having, Mr. Yao, is that you're offering logical ideas while the public is pretty damn sad. That's what I was asking. Aren't they pretty satisfied with this? In other words, if these corporations offered 9 to 9, and the doctors appear to be courteous and happy, and the nurses are jolly and jumping, and who's going to get excited, right? I mean, it's better service than we have.
I have another thing to bring in. About the public, I don't think the public understands enough. I think the majority of the public, when they get sick, they want hospital care, period. And I don't think things like HCA, and for the majority of people, I don't think it's an issue.
I don't think it is.
Which is a problem with the uninformed public, I guess. But also, just this whole bond concept and the capital financing. I heard a speaker for another class in this department a couple months ago who was the person who's coordinating the whole bond program at NC Memorial, and it was this wonderful 2-hour lecture of how great this bond program was, and we're going to have all of you public health students behind us, and here's how it's going to work, and it's going to be great.
Business school for health.
Oh, and it's, it's like, it's this whole opposite viewpoint, and here it is, it's the same department, it's still public health. It's real hard to, how do you know where to stand?
Right.
I mean, I just think it's kind of interesting that we're getting these two opposite viewpoints. And
I think you're
and
living
two
it
differences
very,
of values.
one reason I almost turn to you often because of the personal conversations I have with many is that you're caught up in a period of enormous change, and in which, especially in this school, I have to accept that nursing, which is caught up in other changes and there's other priorities, in which, a great deal of fear is, if it's going this way, then unless we act like and are trained like and function like and can have entry-level jobs like MBAs, we're not very much used to this industry, okay? I mean, it's cost-centered, all this kind of thing, okay? And that becomes ideological, like debate and turn, when there's real